In the long annals of human history, certain names are forever linked to darkness. They are remembered not for acts of greatness, but for the cruelty that defined their reigns. Among them, one emperor stands as a symbol of corruption, violence, and unchecked excess. His name was Nero. A man born into power, raised in the shadow of Rome's glory, and destined to become one of the most infamous rulers the world has ever known. Before we begin this descent into history's shadows, remember, if you appreciate deep explorations of the darker side of the past, subscribe and join us, because this is only the beginning of many journeys into the cruelty of emperors, tyrants, and rulers whose legacies were carved not in honor, but in blood. Nero Claudius Caesar came to the throne at the tender age of 16. At first, many believed his rule could bring stability to an empire that longed for peace. Guided by his ambitious mother, Agrippina, he seemed destined for greatness. But power in Rome was rarely pure. As his reign unfolded, his thirst for control grew stronger, and his paranoia began to consume him. Perhaps nothing reveals the true character of Nero more than the story of his own mother. Agrippina, who had secured her son's path to the throne, soon became a threat to his independence. Nero, driven by suspicion and a desperate need to rule unchallenged, orchestrated her death. The collapse of a boat designed to drown her failed. Soldiers were then sent to finish the work. Rome was horrified. The emperor had ordered the murder of his own mother, and yet the empire remained silent, bound by fear. But this was only the beginning. In the year 64, a great fire tore through the heart of Rome. For 6 long days the flames raged, devouring homes, temples, and markets. The suffering was immense, the devastation complete. And while the truth may never be fully known, whispers spread through the city that Nero himself had ordered the fire to clear space for his grand vision. Others claimed that while the city burned, Nero sang and played music, lost in his own performance as Rome crumbled around him. When the people demanded answers, the emperor turned their anger elsewhere. He blamed the Christians, a small and growing sect, despised and misunderstood. What followed was one of the cruelest persecutions in Roman history. Men and women were torn apart by wild beasts, crucified in public, or burned alive as human torches to illuminate the emperor's gardens at night. Their suffering became Nero's spectacle. Their deaths, his distraction from the truth. While Rome struggled to recover, Nero poured unimaginable wealth into his dream palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. A sprawling complex of gold, marble, and fountains, it was a symbol not of Rome's strength, but of Nero's endless vanity. He famously declared, "Now I can begin to live like a human being." For the starving and dispossessed, his words were nothing but cruelty. But Nero's cruelty was not confined to strangers or enemies. His paranoia spread through the Senate, the army, even his closest friends. Executions, forced suicides, and betrayals became the rhythm of his reign. Anyone suspected of disloyalty could be silenced. The empire became a stage upon which Nero played the role of god, artist, and tyrant all at once. His obsession with performance grew, as he forced Roman elites to attend his endless plays and concerts. No one was allowed to leave, no matter how long or dreadful the spectacle. Rome's emperor demanded applause, and applause he received, not out of admiration, but out of fear. This pattern of extravagance, cruelty, and suspicion would only deepen as time passed. Each year brought new scandals, new executions, and new displays of vanity. And so the story of Nero continues, winding deeper into the shadows of history, an endless reminder of how power, when left unchecked, can corrode the soul and destroy an empire from within. And still, the darkness of Nero's reign spread further. His appetite for luxury grew insatiable, and with every demand for gold, the burden fell upon the people. Heavy taxes crushed the provinces, while the emperor surrounded himself with jewels, music, and endless feasts. The cries of the poor echoed through the streets of Rome, but Nero's ears heard only the sound of his own performances. In the provinces, resentment brewed. Governors feared his wrath, generals watched with suspicion, yet none dared speak too loudly. Those who opposed him were condemned, often forced to take their own lives, their estates seized, their names erased. Rome had seen tyrants before, but in Nero it saw something different, a ruler who blended cruelty with vanity, bloodshed with theater. His cruelty extended beyond politics into every corner of daily life. Spectacles of horror became entertainment, and executions turned into festivals. He demanded loyalty not only in silence but in applause. Citizens were compelled to cheer as he sang, to praise his poetry, to admire his skill in the games. To displease Nero was to court death, and so Rome clapped with trembling hands, a city held hostage by its emperor's ego. And yet the scandals never ceased. Accusations of poisoning, whispers of forbidden desires, rumors of plots both real and imagined spread through the empire. Each whisper was another excuse for blood. Friends vanished overnight, senators fell under suspicion, and families lived in constant fear that a word, a gesture, even a glance could be misinterpreted as treason. The empire became his stage, and Nero its unwilling audience. He saw himself not as a mere ruler, but as an artist whose life was a performance. His greatest role, he believed, was that of the eternal emperor, adored by all, feared by many. But history remembers differently. History remembers the cruelty, the executions, the flames, and the endless hunger for power. And as the years passed, the spiral only deepened. His grip on reality weakened, his reliance on terror sharpened, and the empire itself grew weary. Yet still the stories of Nero's cruelty multiplied, each one darker than the last, each one revealing how absolute power can twist the human spirit. This is the legacy of Nero, a cycle of vanity and violence, a reign where fear was the law and cruelty the currency of survival. And still, more tales remain, of conspiracies crushed, of cities bled dry, of betrayals orchestrated and punishments so grotesque they seemed beyond imagination. And so the story continues, without end, through every chamber of Rome's memory, through every whispered account of those who lived under his shadow. Nero's reign was not a chapter, but a labyrinth, each path leading deeper into darkness, each step revealing yet another act of cruelty, another betrayal, another reminder that history's darkest rulers never truly fade. They echo, endlessly, in the corridors of time. In the long annals of human history, certain names are forever linked to darkness. They are remembered not for acts of greatness, but for the cruelty that defined their reigns. Among them, one emperor stands as a symbol of corruption, violence, and unchecked excess. His name was Nero. A man born into power, raised in the shadow of Rome's glory, and destined to become one of the most infamous rulers the world has ever known. Before we begin this descent into history's shadows, remember, if you appreciate deep explorations of the darker side of the past, subscribe and join us, because this is only the beginning of many journeys into the cruelty of emperors, tyrants, and rulers whose legacies were carved not in honor, but in blood. Nero Claudius Caesar came to the throne at the tender age of 16. At first, many believed his rule could bring stability to an empire that longed for peace. Guided by his ambitious mother, Agrippina, he seemed destined for greatness. But power in Rome was rarely pure. As his reign unfolded, his thirst for control grew stronger, and his paranoia began to consume him. Perhaps nothing reveals the true character of Nero more than the story of his own mother. Agrippina, who had secured her son's path to the throne, soon became a threat to his independence. Nero, driven by suspicion and a desperate need to rule unchallenged, orchestrated her death. The collapse of a boat designed to drown her failed. Soldiers were then sent to finish the work. Rome was horrified. The emperor had ordered the murder of his own mother, and yet the empire remained silent, bound by fear. But this was only the beginning. In the year 64, a great fire tore through the heart of Rome. For 6 long days the flames raged, devouring homes, temples, and markets. The suffering was immense, the devastation complete. And while the truth may never be fully known, whispers spread through the city that Nero himself had ordered the fire to clear space for his grand vision. Others claimed that while the city burned, Nero sang and played music, lost in his own performance as Rome crumbled around him. When the people demanded answers, the emperor turned their anger elsewhere. He blamed the Christians, a small and growing sect, despised and misunderstood. What followed was one of the cruelest persecutions in Roman history. Men and women were torn apart by wild beasts, crucified in public, or burned alive as human torches to illuminate the emperor's gardens at night. Their suffering became Nero's spectacle. Their deaths, his distraction from the truth. While Rome struggled to recover, Nero poured unimaginable wealth into his dream palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. A sprawling complex of gold, marble, and fountains, it was a symbol not of Rome's strength, but of Nero's endless vanity. He famously declared, "Now I can begin to live like a human being." For the starving and dispossessed, his words were nothing but cruelty. And as his palace gleamed, his paranoia grew. Senators whispered in secret, fearful of false accusations. Noble families trembled, for at any moment, the emperor's wrath could fall upon them. A word of disloyalty was enough to end a life. Executions and forced suicides became a grim rhythm of Rome's politics, and the shadow of betrayal never left the emperor's court. Yet Nero was not content with ruling through fear alone. He sought adoration, demanded applause, and forced Rome to endure his endless performances. He fancied himself an artist above all, a poet, a musician, even an actor. The empire's elites were compelled to attend his spectacles, unable to leave no matter how long they dragged on. Applause thundered, not from admiration, but from fear. In Nero's Rome, silence was death. Taxes soared, the provinces bled, and Rome's glory bent beneath the weight of one man's ego. Still, Nero's hunger for extravagance never dimmed. Festivals were staged, games arranged, monuments erected, not for Rome's honor, but for Nero's name. And all the while, suspicion gnawed at him. Conspiracies were uncovered, both real and imagined. The punishment was always the same, death. Families destroyed, allies erased, blood staining the marble of Rome. With each passing year, the empire descended further into chaos. But even this was not the end, for new scandals arose, new horrors unfolded. Stories of poisoning, whispers of forbidden love, tales of brutal punishments and grotesque entertainment spread like wildfire. The emperor who should have been Rome's protector had become its tormentor. And yet, history reminds us that the story of Nero never truly ends. His reign is a labyrinth of cruelty and spectacle, of fire and blood. Each turn reveals another atrocity, another betrayal, another descent into madness. And as we trace these paths, we find ourselves returning to the beginning, to that young emperor of 16 who seemed destined for greatness, but chose instead the road of tyranny. And so the cycle continues. The murder of Agrippina, the fire of Rome, the persecution of Christians, the Golden Palace, the paranoia, the endless performances, each event flows into the next, a never-ending chain of cruelty. Nero's legacy is not a story with an ending, but an echo, reverberating endlessly through time. This is the tale of Nero, and it never ends. For with each retelling, another shadow is revealed, another cruelty remembered, another scar upon Rome uncovered. His story circles back upon itself, an eternal reminder that power unchecked can consume not only an empire, but the soul of the man who holds it. And so, once again, we begin, in the long annals of human history, certain names are forever linked to darkness. In the long annals of human history, there are rulers remembered not for their greatness, but for their cruelty. Their names echo through time as warnings, reminders of how power can corrupt and how vanity can destroy. Among these rulers, one stands out as a symbol of decadence, paranoia, and unimaginable cruelty. His name was Nero. Before we descend into the shadows of his reign, remember this: if you value journeys into the darkest corners of history, subscribe and stay with us, because what you are about to hear is only one among many stories of rulers whose legacy was carved not in honor, but in blood. Nero Claudius Caesar rose to the throne at only 16 years of age. At first, Rome dared to hope for peace, for stability, for renewal. Guided by his mother, Agrippina, he seemed destined to shine. Yet behind the polished mask of youth was a thirst for control that would soon consume both him and the empire he ruled. The first sign of the darkness to come was his betrayal of the very woman who gave him life and power. Agrippina's ambitions clashed with Nero's hunger for independence. In secret, he plotted her death. First, a boat rigged to collapse beneath her failed. But soldiers soon completed what the sea could not. Rome gasped as its emperor murdered his own mother. Yet silence followed, for fear drowned every voice that might have spoken against him. And then came the fire. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD raged for 6 days, devouring homes, temples, and livelihoods. The city was scarred, its people broken. And while truth lies buried in ash, rumors spread that Nero had lit the flames himself, to clear ground for his grandiose dream palace. Some said that as Rome burned, Nero sang with his lyre, lost in music as citizens screamed for help. Whether true or not, this was the emperor the world had come to know, indifferent to suffering, intoxicated by spectacle. But Nero needed a scapegoat. And so he turned upon the Christians, a sect still small and mistrusted. Their fate was horrific. Torn apart by wild beasts, nailed to crosses, or set ablaze to light Nero's gardens, their deaths became his entertainment, their agony his performance. Fear gripped Rome, but cruelty gripped its emperor. While the ashes of Rome still smoldered, Nero erected his masterpiece of vanity, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. Gold-covered halls, endless fountains, gardens stretching into the horizon. And upon its completion, he declared, "Now at last, I can begin to live like a human being." His words cut deep into the starving hearts of his people, who suffered as he feasted, who paid the price for his luxury. Paranoia became his constant companion. Senators fell under suspicion. Noble families were destroyed by accusation alone. Friends were commanded to take their own lives. Each death fed his security, but starved his humanity. Rome was no longer governed, it was suffocated beneath the will of one man. And yet, Nero was not content to be feared alone. He demanded admiration, applause, worship. He believed himself not just an emperor, but an artist. He forced Rome's citizens, generals, and senators alike to endure endless hours of his music and poetry. They were trapped, unable to leave, compelled to cheer, to clap, to flatter. Applause filled the halls, not with sincerity, but with terror. But the cruelty did not end there. Taxes drained the provinces. Entire regions were stripped bare to fund spectacles, monuments, and games meant only to glorify his name. Those who resisted were silenced. Those who questioned vanished. Rome had known tyrants before, but Nero blurred tyranny with theater, cruelty with performance. The scandals multiplied. Accusations of incest, of poisoning, of twisted pleasures whispered across the empire. Conspiracies emerged, real or imagined, and were crushed with ruthless efficiency. The blood of Rome's nobility flowed freely, staining the Senate, chilling the people. No one was safe, for in Nero's Rome, suspicion was guilt, and guilt was death. And as his madness grew, so too did his extravagance. He entered chariot races, performed on stages, declared himself a champion, a god, a living artist. He was Rome's emperor, but he acted as if Rome itself was merely his audience. Each year, the spiral deepened, more blood, more fear, more decadence. Families wept, provinces crumbled, soldiers questioned their loyalty. Yet Nero continued, blind to the cracks widening beneath his empire. This is the legacy of Nero, a labyrinth of cruelty, where every corridor leads to another atrocity. The murder of Agrippina. The fire of Rome. The persecution of Christians. The Golden House. The paranoia, the executions, the endless demands for worship. Each story flows into the next, with no escape, no resolution, no end. And so, the cycle begins again. For history remembers him not in chapters, but in echoes. We return to that young boy of 16, hailed as hope, destined instead for infamy. We return to Agrippina, betrayed. To Rome in flames. To Christians suffering in fire. To an emperor lost in vanity, madness, and cruelty. The story of Nero is eternal, because cruelty never truly dies. It returns, again and again, in the faces of rulers who believe themselves gods, in the hands of tyrants who mistake fear for loyalty. And so, once more, we begin, in the long annals of human history, there are rulers remembered not for their greatness, but for their cruelty. But Nero's cruelty was not confined only to politics or spectacle. It seeped into his personal life, staining every bond of family and friendship. His first wife, Octavia, the daughter of Emperor Claudius, was cast aside and later executed under charges of adultery, charges widely believed to have been false. The Roman people, who loved Octavia for her virtue, mourned her death, but their mourning was dangerous, for to grieve too loudly was to risk Nero's wrath. Then came Poppaea Sabina, his second wife, whose beauty and ambition matched Nero's vanity. Yet even she was not spared his violence. History tells us that in a fit of rage, Nero struck her while she was pregnant, causing her death. The emperor who demanded worship as a god could not master his own temper, and his grief was shallow, overshadowed quickly by his next pursuit. And then there was Sporus, a young boy whom Nero had castrated and forced to marry, presenting him as the likeness of his lost Poppaea. In this grotesque act, Rome saw not only cruelty but madness, as its emperor blurred the line between obsession and perversion. Beyond the palace, Nero's ambition stretched to the far edges of the empire. But while he dreamed of glory, his military record was one of failure. Revolts broke out in Britain under Queen Boudicca, and though Rome eventually crushed her rebellion, the unrest exposed the cracks in his rule. In the east, his efforts against Parthia ended not in triumph, but in uneasy compromise. Even in war, Nero preferred performance to strategy, parades to victories. His obsession with art grew to consume him entirely. He entered chariot races, dressed as an athlete, and declared himself champion before the games even began. He traveled to Greece to perform in theaters, competing in contests where no judge dared deny him victory. In every arena, Nero demanded first place, and in every contest, he received it, not through skill, but through fear. Rome watched in silence, humiliated as its emperor abandoned the duties of state for the vanity of the stage. Grain shortages left the poor starving. Provinces begged for relief. The Senate trembled under the weight of his paranoia. But still Nero sang, still he raced, still he dreamed of glory that existed only in his mind. And yet, the empire could only bear so much. Revolts ignited in the provinces, first small, then vast. In Gaul, in Spain, in Africa, Rome's governors declared their loyalty not to Nero, but to themselves. Even the Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect him, turned away when the Senate finally named him an enemy of the state. Alone, abandoned, Nero fled the city that had once applauded his every step. He wandered through gardens and villas, clinging to the illusion of power, until the reality became too heavy to ignore. Cornered by his own despair, he took his own life, or so the historians say, uttering words that reveal his deepest vanity, "What an artist dies in me." But though his life ended, his story never does. For Nero's reign is more than a tale of one man, it is a mirror held up to every age. His cruelty, his vanity, his paranoia, they return in different forms, in different rulers, in different times. Rome survived him, but the scars of his rule remained etched in memory, a warning passed down through centuries. And so the cycle unfolds once again, the murder of his mother, the fire that devoured Rome, the persecution of the innocent, the palace of gold, the endless performances, the betrayals, the madness, the downfall. Each detail flows into the next, and when it ends, it begins again, for the story of Nero is not a line but a circle. And as we circle back, we remember the boy who ascended at 16, the empire that hoped for peace, the mother who whispered in his ear, the promise of stability that dissolved into flames. It is here the tale restarts, and here it will always restart, an eternal echo of cruelty in the corridors. But to understand Nero's reign fully, we must look not only at his crimes of blood, but also at the way he reshaped Rome itself. For while the ashes of the great fire still smoldered, Nero sought to rebuild the city in his image. He dreamed of boulevards wider than any Rome had known, of colonnades lined with marble, of markets and theaters that carried his name. Some of these projects improved the city, but all of them drained its treasury. The Senate, once the heart of Rome's political life, became little more than an audience for Nero's vanity. Senators sat in silence, their power stripped away, their dignity reduced to the role of spectators. When Nero performed, they were compelled to clap. When Nero spoke, they were commanded to praise. To defy him, even in the smallest gesture, was to invite death. And so the Senate became a theater, its nobility acting out a tragedy of fear. But Nero's cruelty was not always the cruelty of blood. It was often the cruelty of neglect. Grain shipments faltered, leaving the poor to starve. Soldiers on the frontiers went unpaid, their loyalty fraying as Rome's enemies grew bolder. For while the empire strained, its emperor cared more for his art than for its armies. He toured Greece, competing in musical contests and athletic games, demanding the crown in every event. Victors were declared before the competition even began, for who would dare deny Nero the glory he demanded? And yet, even in his absence, Rome could not escape him. Statues of Nero rose in public squares. Coins bore his image. His likeness stared from every corner, a reminder that the emperor was everywhere, that resistance was nowhere. The people lived beneath his shadow, their voices silenced, their eyes lowered. Still, whispers survived. Some said Nero dreamed of cutting a canal through Greece, to reshape the land itself for his glory. Others claimed he wanted to move the capital from Rome to Egypt, to reign not as emperor of Rome but as a god upon the Nile. These ambitions, wild and reckless, showed a man no longer tethered to the reality of rule. And yet the strangest chapter of Nero's legacy came after his death. For even when the emperor was gone, Rome could not let him rest. Rumors spread that Nero had not truly died, that he had escaped eastward, that he would one day return. In distant lands, impostors arose, men who claimed to be Nero reborn, gathering followers who longed for the return of their emperor. This belief, the Nero redivivus legend, haunted Rome for decades, a reminder that cruelty leaves not only scars but ghosts. And still, his name endured, not in honor, but in infamy. To later generations, Nero became a symbol of tyranny, of decadence, of a ruler who valued art above justice, and vanity above life. Poets cursed him, historians dissected him, Christians remembered him as a persecutor, and Rome herself carried the weight of his shadow. But his story never ends. It returns again and again, in every retelling, in every whisper, in every warning. The boy who rose at 16. The mother betrayed. The fire that devoured a city. The Christians burned as torches. The golden house shining while the people starved. The Senate humiliated. The empire strained. The impostors who claimed his name. The endless performances, the endless cruelty, the endless cycle. And as we follow the circle once more, we return to the beginning. To history's reminder that power unchecked becomes cruelty, that vanity without limit becomes madness, and that the legacy of Nero is not a single story, but an echo without end. But Nero's shadow did not end with his death, nor even with the impostors who claimed his name. His image endured in the writings of Rome's historians, in the sermons of the early Christians, and in the fears of generations to come. Each account sharpened his cruelty, magnified his excess, and ensured that Nero would forever be remembered not as a man, but as a symbol of corruption itself. Tacitus, the stern historian of Rome, wrote of Nero's reign with bitterness, painting him as a tyrant who masked vice beneath the costume of an artist. Suetonius, with sharp anecdotes, preserved the image of Nero fiddling while Rome burned, of Nero singing as death surrounded him. Cassius Dio, writing later, echoed the same themes: paranoia, cruelty, extravagance. Through their pens, Nero's memory was sealed, his name placed among the blackest of tyrants. Yet it was among the Christians that Nero's legacy grew darker still. For those who had watched their brethren tortured, crucified, or burned at his command, Nero was more than a tyrant, he was the very face of evil. Some whispered that Nero was the beast of prophecy, that the number of his name in Greek letters matched the fateful 666. To them, Nero was not just a memory, but a warning, the Antichrist who would return in the final days. And still, Rome bore the weight of his rule long after he was gone. The treasury lay emptied by his extravagance. The provinces had risen in revolt. The Praetorian Guard, once loyal, had betrayed him. Civil war erupted in the year of the 4 emperors, when one man after another claimed the throne, plunging Rome into chaos. Nero's death had not brought peace, it had opened the door to an empire in turmoil. Even centuries later, when emperors ruled with stability and Rome's frontiers stretched wide, the name of Nero lingered as a curse. To call a ruler another Nero was to brand him a monster, a tyrant without mercy. His palace, the Domus Aurea, was buried beneath earth and stone, yet fragments remained, frescoes painted in gold and crimson, a reminder of the vanity that had drained a city of its strength. And still, the legends refused to die. In the east, pretenders rose again, claiming to be Nero returned, claiming to carry his spirit. They stirred rebellions, shook provinces, unsettled Rome itself. For many, the memory of Nero was too real, too recent, too terrifying to fade. His ghost walked the empire long after his body had turned to dust. And so we see that Nero's reign was more than the life of one man. It was a cycle of vanity and violence that weakened the very empire it sought to glorify. It was a lesson written in blood and fire, that unchecked power consumes not only the ruler but the state itself. But the cycle does not end. For again, we return to the beginning, the young boy crowned at 16, the mother guiding his first steps, the hope of peace, the promise of renewal. And again, we descend into betrayal, into fire, into spectacle, into blood. History does not let go of Nero, because Nero is not just history, he is warning, he is symbol, he is echo. And so his story turns once more, circling back without end, reminding us again and again that in the long annals of human history, there are rulers remembered not for their greatness, but for their cruelty. But perhaps what is most chilling about Nero is not only what he did, but why he did it. For at the heart of his cruelty lay a fragile soul, torn between fear and vanity. From childhood, Nero had been groomed for greatness by others, his mother's ambition, his tutor's designs, the Senate's expectations. He grew not as a leader shaped by discipline, but as a boy indulged in luxury, praised for charm, shielded from hardship. Power fell upon him before wisdom had time to form. And so, when the crown was placed on his head, it weighed heavier than he could bear. To escape that weight, he sought refuge in performance. The stage, the lyre, the racecourse, these became his sanctuary. But what for others was pastime, for Nero became obsession. He craved the applause of thousands, not for art's sake, but for validation. Each cheer silenced the voices of doubt. Each ovation dulled the whispers of betrayal. Yet applause forced by fear is hollow, and Nero, though adored in appearance, lived haunted by suspicion that no one truly loved him. This paranoia extended even to the army. Rome's legions, the backbone of its empire, grew restless under Nero's neglect. He demanded loyalty, but offered little in return. Campaigns were underfunded, victories hollow, soldiers poorly rewarded. For them, Nero was not a general but a performer, a ruler more interested in crowns from Greek contests than laurels from battlefields. When rebellion flared in Gaul and Spain, the legions who once swore loyalty turned instead to their governors. Nero's power, built on spectacle, could not withstand the weight of steel. And yet his cultural impact was undeniable. In architecture, in art, in theatre, Nero left behind both marvel and madness. The Domus Aurea was obscene in its excess, yet it introduced techniques in design that future emperors imitated. His obsession with Greek culture spread Hellenistic art deeper into Rome, reshaping tastes for centuries. Even in cruelty, Nero left marks that endured. But what Rome gained in culture, it lost in stability. His reign drained the treasury, humiliated the Senate, alienated the legions, and scarred the people. It was said that after his death, when news spread through the city, many rejoiced, yet some wept, not out of love, but from fear of the chaos to come. For the collapse of Nero was the collapse of certainty, and in the vacuum of his absence, Rome staggered into civil war. Still, the memory of Nero endured like an open wound. Later rulers tried to distance themselves from his name, yet some secretly imitated his cruelty. Others even envied his audacity. In whispers, Rome spoke of him as both monster and warning, a reminder that beneath the marble of empire lay the fragility of human pride. And so, once again, his story circles back, the boy crowned too young, the mother slain, the city aflame, the innocent tortured, the palace gleaming, the empire trembling. His tale is not a line but a spiral, always descending, always repeating, never ending. And as we hear it again, we are reminded that Nero is not merely a figure of the past. He is a mirror, showing us what happens when power feeds only vanity, when fear replaces loyalty, when cruelty becomes law. Thus, his echo continues. The fire burns once more. The lyre plays once more. The crowd claps once more, with trembling hands. And in the long annals of human history, we begin again with the words, "There are rulers remembered not for their greatness, but for their cruelty." But Nero's legacy did not end with the fall of his body, nor with the ruins of his palace. His name lived on, reimagined, reshaped, and retold by those who came after him. Every generation saw in Nero not only a memory of Rome's darkest emperor, but a symbol of the dangers that lurk within power itself. Among the Christians, his name became eternal. To them, Nero was not just a tyrant, he was the persecutor, the embodiment of cruelty, the beast who set their brothers and sisters ablaze. Whispers rose that he was the very figure spoken of in sacred visions, the beast of Revelation, the number 666 hidden within his name. To the faithful, Nero was no longer a man of the past, but a prophecy, a shadow that could rise again at the end of time. In Roman memory, he was cursed and mocked. Later emperors distanced themselves from his excesses, yet some quietly imitated his theater of cruelty. His palace, the Golden House, was buried beneath layers of earth, yet even in ruin, it fascinated. Future rulers walked through its painted chambers and marveled at its ambition, even as they condemned its builder. And in the centuries that followed, poets and chroniclers turned his life into parable. Medieval writers cast him as the face of evil, a lesson in the wages of sin. Dante placed him in the flames of hell, tormented forever. Shakespeare alluded to him as a symbol of tyranny and madness. To artists and thinkers, Nero was not merely history, he was archetype. The archetype of vanity without restraint, cruelty without conscience, power without humanity. Legends refused to die. In far corners of the empire, impostors arose, claiming to be Nero returned from the grave. They gathered crowds, stirred revolts, unsettled governors. Some believed him immortal, others cursed his name in prayer, yet all agreed, Nero was not gone. His ghost walked among them. And even today, his name survives in language itself. To call a man a Nero is to brand him tyrant, destroyer, persecutor. His image lives in novels, in theater, in cinema, in music. Time has not erased him, because cruelty, spectacle, and tyranny are threads that continue to weave themselves into the fabric of history. Nero remains not just as a man, but as a warning. And still, the cycle of his tale continues. We return again to his youth, the boy emperor raised too high, too soon. We watch again as Agrippina falls to his betrayal. We see Rome engulfed in fire, Christians burning in gardens, the golden palace gleaming, the Senate humiliated, the empire trembling, and the man himself lost in his own applause. Each time the story is told, new shadows emerge, new details resurface, and the echo grows louder. For Nero is not only in the past, he is a pattern. His cruelty lives wherever rulers mistake vanity for greatness. His shadow rises wherever fear becomes law. His ghost lingers in every age that repeats the mistakes of Rome. And so, as history turns, we return once more to the beginning. To the long annals of human memory, where some rulers are remembered not for their greatness, but for their cruelty. Among them, one name always returns, Nero. When Nero fell, the empire did not sigh with relief, it staggered into chaos. The young emperor's suicide left a vacuum that no one was prepared to fill. Within months, Rome erupted into civil war, an era historians call the Year of the Four Emperors. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian each claimed the throne in rapid succession, and each battle for power brought bloodshed to the streets of the Eternal City. The legions, once loyal to Nero, had fractured. Provinces rebelled or declared their independence. Governors, generals, and soldiers vied for supremacy, not for the good of Rome, but for their survival. Cities burned, families were displaced, and the political machinery of the empire teetered on collapse. In every corner, the echo of Nero's reign remained, a reminder of the fragility created when power is concentrated in the hands of a single, unpredictable man. Even as the civil war raged, memories of Nero haunted the people. Rumors spread that he had not truly died, that he would return from the east to reclaim the throne. In towns along the Mediterranean, impostors surfaced, claiming to be Nero reborn, gathering followers who longed for his return or feared the vengeance of his ghost. These tales persisted for decades, ensuring that the fear of Nero outlived his life. The Golden House, once a symbol of excess and cruelty, was abandoned, yet its ruins influenced Roman architecture for generations. Future emperors rebuilt Rome upon its foundations, but the memory of Nero's extravagance lingered. Festivals, games, and spectacles became a delicate balance, entertain the people, yes, but never again at the expense of Rome itself. Nero's failures taught lessons in governance, even as his cruelty continued to inspire fascination. And yet, the ripple effects extended beyond politics. Christianity, still in its infancy, absorbed the memory of Nero's persecutions into its collective consciousness. Martyrs were remembered, saints were venerated, and the idea of Nero as the archetype of the Antichrist became a cornerstone of apocalyptic belief. Generations of believers recounted his reign as proof that evil can take the form of worldly power, and that faith must endure even when cruelty seems unstoppable. The Senate slowly rebuilt its authority, yet it never fully recovered the prestige lost under Nero. Senators learned to guard their words carefully, to mask their thoughts, to survive rather than challenge. The empire's bureaucratic machinery adapted, yes, but the lesson was clear: unchecked power can destroy institutions from within. Nero's shadow remained in every cautious whisper, in every restrained vote, in every cautious decision. And still, the legend of Nero was never static. Poets, historians, philosophers, and later artists expanded upon it. His cruelty became mythic, his vanity emblematic, his paranoia archetypal. Dante placed him in hell, a warning to all who sought power without virtue. Shakespeare and other dramatists explored his madness and indulgence, finding in him a mirror for the dangers of desire and ambition. Even today, Nero remains shorthand for tyranny and excess, a name that evokes spectacle, fire, blood, and ruin. And so, as we trace the ripple effects of his death, we see that Nero's story never truly ends. We return again to the boy emperor, the ambitious mother, the fire that consumed Rome, the Christians burned in gardens, the golden house gleaming above the ashes. We return to the Senate silenced by fear, to the army torn between loyalty and survival, to the ghosts and impostors who claimed his name, to the historians who preserved his infamy. Each thread flows into the next, and the cycle continues.